So you can imagine the internet is kind of like the phone network, where every user on the internet actually has a phone number with them. Now you can have different types of users. For example, you might have businesses that have websites that they want people to visit, and for whatever reason, whether it's to buy products or for whatever reason they want their website. Then of course you have general users who also have numbers, and these numbers are called IP addresses. So the whole point of how the computer network works is that whenever you want to visit a website, your computer will call into, for example, an IP registry, which basically works out what the domain name is. So for example, if you want to contact Google, say www.google.com.au, then your computer goes to the registry, finds out what the IP address is for that URL, and then it tries contacting that number directly. It's the same as if you call the registry and then find out what Google's phone number is and then ring them. Alright, so you've got those two basic types. There are more, but those are the two basic types of IP addresses that you have. Those with registered URLs and those without. So in order to actually perform a filtering operation, the way the system works is that you can either do a URL filtering mechanism or you can do an IP address filtering mechanism. So the IP address, for example, decides that this particular server that only serves a banned material should just be banned flat out. So any form of communication with that particular IP address is just banned altogether. And then of course there are more complicated URL-based filterings where you have a stack of machines owned by the government or whoever is providing a blacklist, which is just a list of URLs and IP addresses that are not to be allowed to be accessed, and it goes through the internet and it trawls through what that website actually has on it. It looks for keywords. If it finds those keywords, then it determines that that website is banned material and adds it to the blacklist to prevent anyone from accessing that. That's how the general keyword search works. However, another important technical aspect for the internet is the concept of mirroring. Alright, now mirroring is simply where one website hosts the exact same content as another website. So this is very popular in the open source community, for example, Debian, Ubuntu, etc. They all have mirrored sites where you can download their software, so that if the main server or URL is down, then you can go to alternatives to download the exact same software. So I'm now going to move on to a basic overview of the filter. So the filter will actually only filter websites that are accessed from Australia. It doesn't actually have anything to do with ordinary communications between two machines that are not listed in the URL directory. Alright, so it basically doesn't stop what's called peer-to-peer. If you have a friend called Bob and you communicate with his computer, then the filter does absolutely nothing to stop that. So you can send whatever information you like, it's not going to be filtered. If your friend Bob, however, happens to be in the United States, then you can actually do what's called IP tunneling, where you get your friend Bob's computer to actually tunnel to another website that is banned. So if you want to access something that you're not allowed to access, then you simply get Bob's computer to forward on all the traffic between you and this banned site, and you therefore work around the filter, which is a very easy, simple solution because there are actually already a lot of free IP tunneling sites out there. So the government would either have to ban those, which is a strong restriction on freedoms, or it would have to come up with some other alternative to prevent you from doing this, because it would have to work out how, every computer that you could possibly contact outside of Australia could be used to filter, and that's really not a practical solution, and personally I don't know of any technical way of achieving this goal. So you're almost certainly going to be able to do IP tunneling to get around this filter. Another issue, of course, goes back to mirroring. Now, like I said, a lot of sites actually mirror, i.e. have the same content at different URLs, which means the government is going to have to go through and check pretty much every single possible URL on the internet to be able to filter them all. Otherwise, if somebody just mirrors any banned content, then it's still easily accessible because the filter won't recognize it as on the blacklist and therefore won't filter it. So that's another way you can get around the filter mechanism. Then, of course, there are certain sites whose base URL has to be allowed through, at least according to what the government plans or has stated to plan. Something like YouTube, for example. YouTube contains a lot of videos that would be considered banned material, and it then has to go through and make sure that it only bans those videos that it wants to ban according to the filter and not ban anything else. This introduces a lot of problems because you can actually do mirroring in YouTube itself. So if one video happens to be banned in Australia, then your friend Bob could simply redeposit that banned material on a different subset URL and then you can still access it. So it's very similar to mirroring. And there's not much the government can really do about that, because they would have to constantly have a very, very massive array of servers to go through and filter everything continuously. So this is going to take a lot of resources to actually implement this technique. And then, of course, there's general mirroring, as I said before, where you can get a friend to just mirror things directly for you if you don't want to do peer-to-peer all the time. So the other strategy you can use if you want to avoid being banned from overseas is you can simply do keyword corruption. Now, I'm sure a lot of you will probably have received spam in your email accounts for things like V1GARA, which of course means Viagra. Alright? It's an attempt to get through the spam filters by simply corrupting the keywords so that the machines that are constantly having to filter the internet don't actually recognize that as a banned keyword. The other alternative is just use graphics, because the filter has no ability to actually recognize any words in graphics. So if you're only downloading graphical pictures and there's no text involved, then the filtering system cannot work on that. So again, these are very easy mechanisms to get around this filter, which makes the filter extremely ineffective. So I've talked through how ineffective the filter actually is, but what are the sorts of impacts that introducing this ineffective filter would have on you if you try and actually obey the law and not actually usurp and use any of these very easy to do implementations? So if you own unclassified material in the past, it's basically not been inherently a criminal act to do that. It's only been criminal to sell unclassified material, or or alternatively to own unclassified material that has been obtained illegally, either through piracy or through committing a crime to actually obtain the material. But if the material itself has just been unclassified but not actually illegal, in the past it's been legal to actually own it in Australia. But with the censorship introduced by the filter, that will effectively no longer be the case. You'll be unable to look up anything, for example, on euthanasia discussions. So if you want to write a paper for your honours on euthanasia in Australia, then your ability to access the knowledge will be extremely limited. And there will be a whole raft of other topics that will be made illegal to actually legally obtain information on, which will greatly hinder our ability to find knowledge and to, understand the world we live in. And the thing is, with the filter as it's proposed at the moment, you won't know what is banned. The blacklist will be kept secret. You have, only the option to reverse engineer the filter, which would in itself be an illegal act. But you cannot actually know what's going to be filtered, so the government could technically filter anything that they want. And the filter is going to be mandatory. There's no opt-out option. Originally, the government proposed using what is called nanny software, which is effectively a personalized filter, where it would filter out things that are now going to be mandatory. And the thing that the government found was that almost nobody was bothering to opt into this nanny filter software. So they eventually shut it down, and since that was such an abysmal failure, they decided to, instead of abolishing the whole idea because it's stupid, to actually mandate it, so now everyone is effectively forced to use this software. And the ISPs have to implement this filter. So you have no choice about this. You're going to be censored if you want to behave legally. Alright? That's an important point. You have no choice. You don't know what you're being censored about, but you're going to be censored whether you want to be or not. Whether you have kids in the house or not, you will be censored. What you can access will be limited. So the filter itself, apart from just being ineffectual, because you can easily technically get around it, even though those technical get-arounds might be made illegal, you can still easily enough do it. But the filter itself, assuming that you do actually follow through the legal process of using the filter, will still have a lot of what's called false negatives. These are sites that should have been filtered because they contain banned material, but aren't. So what's the consequence of having false negatives? Well, parents and teachers and students who might actually believe that the filter is actually going to do something useful and actually protect them will suddenly discover that it's not actually doing what it's supposed to do, because there'll be all these sites, whether they're mirrored or just relabeled, that contain banned material which you can access still. So the only way you can actually be guaranteed to make sure that a student doesn't see something illegal is to have somebody constantly nursing them. Then, of course, there are going to be a lot of false positives. These are situations where websites get banned, which really shouldn't be, because there's nothing actually illegal or unclassified in that material. Something like the canteen website of a high school got banned or put onto the blacklist simply because of the keywords that they used.